Now we're going to turn to making audio and oral meanings. Audio and oral meanings share the sense of hearing as a primary medium of perception. Audio meanings range from ambient or background sounds in our environment to sounds that have symbolic meaning and to the complex meanings represented in music. Oral meanings carry with them the basic qualities of audio meanings as we modulate volume and pitch in the sounds of speaking. Despite the important connections between these, there are large and significant differences between the ways in which language is formed in the oral and the written modes. This is what we want to focus on in this section.
In this section, we're going to look at two more of these modes in this multimodal grammar, this way of describing the world of meaning across multiple modes. Two more modes we're looking at, audio mode and oral mode. And I've put these two together because they're both about hearing and they're linked in some interesting kinds of ways. This is our diagram of a kind of a wheel, if you like, of all the modes where things have been sort of put together because they more or less border each other. In fact, all the modes happen simultaneously. They're all overlay. There are cross connections between all of them. But I have this notion of kind of supermarket order. You know, you find the cream somewhere near the yogurt, somewhere near the milk. So supermarket order is things that you put beside each other because they're roughly associated with each other. So we've kind of built this overall model of multimodal meaning, and I started with written meanings, and we're going to end with oral meanings, but in fact, written and oral are sort of adjacent, but the reason why I've kept them a long way apart is they're different in ways which are kind of counterintuitive, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. And I've put the oral near audio, and audio is actually pretty near gestural, to be quite frank, because often what we're doing with audio, particularly with oral and speech and sound, it's linked with gesture. So in other words, there's a kind of in the wheel, there's a kind of set of associations, rough associations. And again, in the model, synesthesia is the process of representing a meaning in one mode, then another, and swapping backwards and forwards between those modes. Applying now the multiliteracies grammar, this grammar of multimodality, to audio meanings, we can refer with a particular sound. The world is full of dings and clicks and all sorts of alerts. There are all sorts of sounds around us in the world. There's music around us in the world which creates senses of atmosphere and emotion and ambience. So there are all these kinds of sounds around us. But also what we have is we can also refer to a kind of a concept. If you like, a bell ringing, one particular bell ringing is just one instance of a bell ringing, but bells ringing in general is, if you like, a kind of an audio concept, a kind of a symbol which we represent in audio terms. And what happens is there are relations in these things. I mean, what we pick up with sound is directionality, which is there's a connection between sound and space, whose sound it is, and so on. So that's the world of what sounds things that sounds can refer to. Now, in this area of dialogue, which is how are people positioned? Well, people are positioned pretty directly in terms of sound. There are sound sources. I'm speaking now and you're hearing now, and that establishes a relationship which is essentially an audio relationship. Or I ring a bell, I'm the person who makes the sound, you're the person who hears the sound. And there's also directionality. Sound comes from certain directions, and we get positioned as people by these patterns of sound. Also, what we do is we have structure in sound. We actually, in the same way that we get words into sentences, into paragraphs, and we build linguistic meanings, what we do is we build sound design. So there are a lot of sounds built into computer systems, for example, computer alerts, various types of alert, dings and the like, but also the most elaborate form of notation of sound structure is musical notation, in which the structure of a symphony, for example, is remarkably complex, and that's actually building a design in sound which was heavily structured, and we actually build a notation system not unlike the notation system that we build for writing in some senses in order to represent those patterns of sound. And what we also have in terms of structure is we actually have media which give often sounds a form and a structure. There's something about live sound, there's something about recorded sound. The media actually do stuff to sound as well, which forms what it is and shapes what it is. Sound is situated in terms of our fourth question about meaning, our fourth grammatical dimension. Where is the sound to be heard? And how is it like and unlike other sounds? And that's everything from skeuomorphism, which is a word used in the computer world often to describe visual associations. So the most famous example of this in recent years was in the Steve Jobs era with Apple. Visual skeuomorphism was that your little address book in the Apple email system and whatever had a leather cover, and the calendar was like a page torn off. So in other words, these things were digital objects, but the skeuomorphism was to associate them with the visual skeuomorphism was about associating them with historical things which were non-digital because it sort of tells you what it is. Well, the equivalent in sound is when you press a keyboard and that click actually is designed to sound like an old-fashioned typewriter a lot of the time. Listen to it. It's actually the sound of a typewriter. So in fact, touching a keyboard is not the same as using a typewriter, but we build this association of similarity, which situates a particular sound in the larger context and history of sounds. But of course, a much larger version of the same thing is musical genres. So things like, I'm listening to a piece of music and it's a piece of blues or a piece of heavy metal or a piece of classical music because it is in some senses like other genres, other pieces of music which are part of that genre. And of course, with sounds, what we do is there are purposes in sounds. I press the doorbell, I create a piece of music, I play a piece of music because it pleases me and it captures a mood. And there are also meanings in the hearing. So my hearing of something may not be something which is designed into the meaning. It may be my interpretation of what that sound means in a particular moment. So in other words, we have these structures of intention going on as well. So my purpose here is to talk about the way in which we can actually build this world of sound as a meaning system with all these layers of meaning going on simultaneously.